The wolf's yellow eyes locked onto Vivian through the blizzard as blood dripped from Elias's frozen hands. 3 days married to a stranger. 1 bullet left. The pack circled closer through waist-deep snow while their cabin burned behind them, set ablaze by the very men who swore they'd run them off this cursed Montana valley by New Year's. Vivian's finger trembled on the trigger. Elias whispered something she couldn't hear over the wind. This wasn't the frontier dream either of them imagined. This was survival, raw, brutal, and about to get worse. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Hit that like button and stick with me until the end. You won't believe where this goes. The train was 2 hours late, and Elias Mercer had already convinced himself she wouldn't come. He stood on the Laurel Creek platform with his hat pulled low, shoulders hunched against the December cold, watching his breath fog the air. Around him, families reunited with shouts and embraces. A small boy ran past chasing a dog. Someone laughed. Normal people living normal lives. Elias wasn't normal anymore. Hadn't been for 3 years. He shifted his weight, felt the familiar ache in his left leg where the logging accident had nearly crippled him. That injury had cost him his job, his reputation, and the woman he'd planned to marry, Sarah Pritchard, who'd taken one look at him limping and decided damaged goods weren't worth her time. Her father had been kinder about it. "Nothing personal, son, but Sarah needs a man who can provide." Provide. The word still tasted like ash. So Elias had done what broken men did in 1884. He'd gone west, bought land nobody wanted in Montana territory with money he'd saved for a wedding that never happened, built a cabin with his own bleeding hands, ran cattle that barely survived each winter, lived alone because loneliness was easier than rejection, until loneliness stopped being easier. The advertisement had cost him $2 he couldn't afford. Rancher seeking wife. Montana territory. Must be strong. No expectations of comfort. Honest work for honest partnership. 43 women had written back. Most wanted details about his property, his prospects, his plans. A few included photographs of themselves looking soft and completely unsuited for frontier life. One asked if he attended church regularly. Another wanted to know his views on temperance. Only Vivian Hale's letter had been different. "Mr. Mercer, I'm 26 years old, unmarried, and currently employed as a seamstress in Boston, earning barely enough to afford a rented room with 4 other women. I have no family, no prospects, no illusions about what frontier life requires. I can cook, clean, shoot, and work until my hands bleed if that's what survival demands. I'm not looking for romance. I'm looking for a chance to build something that belongs to me. If you're offering genuine partnership, not servitude dressed up as marriage, then I'll come. V. Hale." Elias had read that letter 17 times before writing back. Something about her bluntness had cracked through his careful defenses. She wasn't pretending, wasn't trying to charm him, just laying out terms like a business contract. He'd sent her train fare with a single-page response. "Come to Laurel Creek, Montana. I'll meet you. We'll figure out the rest." Now, standing on this frozen platform, he wondered if he'd made a catastrophic mistake. The train whistle screamed. Elias's heart lurched. The locomotive emerged from the gray afternoon like some massive iron beast, brakes shrieking, steam billowing. It shuddered to a stop with a final metallic groan. Doors opened. Passengers flooded out. Elias searched the crowd, pulse hammering. He had no idea what Vivian looked like. She hadn't sent a photograph. He'd described himself as tall, brown hair, will be wearing a black coat, which described half the men in Montana. A minute passed. 2. The platform began to clear. Maybe she'd changed her mind. Maybe she'd taken one look at Laurel Creek through the train window, the rough buildings, the mud streets, the mountains looming like prison walls, and decided to ride straight back to civilization. Then he saw her. A young woman stood alone near the last passenger car, one hand gripping a battered leather suitcase, the other shading her eyes as she scanned the thinning crowd. She wore a dark traveling dress that had seen better days and a coat that was too thin for Montana winter. Her hair was pinned up severe and practical. No hat, no gloves. But it was her face that stopped Elias cold. Not because she was beautiful, though she was, in a sharp-edged way that had nothing soft about it. No, what struck him was her expression. She looked calculating. like she was assessing every person, every building, every detail with the focus of someone placing a high-stakes bet. This was a woman who'd already decided to survive. Elias started forward, then hesitated. His limp was worse in cold weather. What would she think when she saw him hobbling toward her like a cripple? Sarah's disgusted face flashed through his memory. Coward, he told himself savagely. You brought her all the way out here. Least you can do is introduce yourself. He forced himself to walk normally, ignoring the pain shooting through his leg. Miss Hale? She turned. Her eyes were gray, the color of winter storms, and they locked onto his with unsettling directness. Mr. Mercer. Not a question, a confirmation. Yes, ma'am. He reached for her suitcase. I can carry it. Her voice was crisp, with the clipped accent of educated Boston, but she handed him the case anyway. It's not heavy. I didn't bring much. Elias took it. She was right. It weighed almost nothing. Everything this woman owned fit in one small bag. They stood there awkwardly while the last passengers dispersed and the train prepared to depart. Up close, Elias could see the dark circles under her eyes, the hollow look of someone who hadn't eaten well in weeks. Her coat had been mended multiple times. The ranch is about 2 hours north, he said finally. I've got a wagon. It's rough country. I assumed. Vivian glanced at the mountains. Your letter mentioned wolf country. Yes, ma'am. We've had trouble with packs this year. Lost 3 calves last month. Do you have weapons? The question caught him off guard. 2 rifles, a shotgun, revolver. Can you teach me to shoot? You said in your letter. I lied. She met his eyes again. I've never fired a gun in my life, but I learned fast. Elias felt something shift in his chest. Relief, maybe, or respect. I'll teach you. Good. Vivian nodded once, decisive. I need to understand something before we go further, Mr. Mercer. All right. Are you a violent man? The directness of it hit like a slap. Elias took a breath. No, ma'am. I've never raised a hand to a woman. Never will. Do you drink? Occasionally, not to excess. Do you gamble? No. Are you in debt? No, the land is paid for. The cattle are mine. Vivian studied his face like she was reading a contract for loopholes. Why did you really send for a mail-order bride, Mr. Mercer? A man your age should have prospects. Elias felt his jaw tighten. I had prospects once. They didn't work out. Because I got injured and suddenly I wasn't worth marrying anymore. The bitterness in his voice surprised even him. That clear enough? Something flickered in Vivian's expression. Not pity, but recognition. I was engaged once, too. He left me for a woman with a larger dowry. Then my father's business collapsed and I lost everything except my sewing skills and a reputation as a woman nobody wanted. They stared at each other. 2 damaged people standing on a frozen platform, strangers bound by desperation and grim determination. So we both know what rejection looks like, Elias said quietly. Yes, Vivian's voice was steady, which means we both know the value of honesty. So let me be clear, I came here to build a life, not to be rescued. I'll work, I'll learn, I'll do whatever this land demands, but I won't be property, Mr. Mercer. I won't be owned. I'm not looking to own anyone, Miss Hale. I'm looking for a partner. Then we understand each other. She extended her hand. Elias shook it. Her grip was firm despite the cold. We should go. There's a storm coming tonight. They walked to where he'd left the wagon, a rough flatbed pulled by 2 sturdy horses. Elias helped Vivian up onto the wooden seat, then climbed up beside her. She didn't comment on his limp, but he saw her notice it. As they pulled away from Laurel Creek, heading north into increasingly wild country, Elias realized he'd been holding his breath. Tell me about the ranch, Vivian said. 160 acres. Most of it's grazing land, some timber. The cabin's small, 1 room, loft for sleeping. I've got 23 head of cattle right now, down from 30 in spring. 2 horses besides these. Some chickens that keep getting killed by foxes. Water? Creek runs through the property. Freezes over in deep winter, but we can break the ice. Neighbors? Closest is the Talbot family, about 5 miles east. Good people. Beyond that, Elias gestured at the empty landscape. We're pretty isolated. That's what I wanted. Vivian pulled her thin coat tighter as wind cut across the open country. Boston was suffocating. Too many people, all of them watching, judging, whispering. Out here, at least failure will be private. Or success, Elias said. She glanced at him. You really believe we can succeed? I believe we've got a better chance together than apart. The words hung between them as the wagon rattled north. Snow began to fall, light at first, then heavier. The mountains rose ahead like ancient sentinels, their peaks lost in gray cloud. Vivian was quiet for a long time, watching the landscape change from scattered homesteads to absolute wilderness. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer. I was terrified on that train, kept thinking I'd made a horrible mistake, that I was riding towards something worse than what I left behind. And now? Now I'm still terrified, but at least I'm moving forward instead of drowning slowly. Elias understood that. He'd been drowning slowly for 3 years. By the time they reached the turnoff to his property, snow was falling thick and steady. The horses strained against the incline as the trail climbed into foothills. Vivian gripped the seat as the wagon jolted over frozen ruts. How much farther? She asked. 20 minutes. The cabin's in a valley just beyond that ridge. They crested the rise, and Elias pulled the horses to a stop, giving Vivian her first real view of what would be her home. The valley spread below them, a bowl of white surrounded by pine-covered slopes. A thin ribbon of smoke rose from the cabin chimney where he'd left a fire banked. The barn stood to one side, rough but solid. Cattle were scattered across the near pasture, dark shapes against snow. It looked lonely, isolated, harsh. Elias waited for disappointment, for regret. Instead, Vivian leaned forward, studying the scene with that same calculating intensity she'd shown on the platform. It's defensible, she said finally. The valley gives you clear sight lines. The creek provides water, timber for fuel and building. The cabin's positioned with the barn as a windbreak. She glanced at him. You chose this location strategically. Previous owner chose it, but yes, he knew what he was doing. What happened to him? Died. Pneumonia. His family wanted nothing to do with frontier life, so they sold cheap. Vivian nodded slowly. I can work with this. Those 5 words hit Elias harder than he expected. Not, it's nice or it'll do. Just simple assessment. I can work with this. Like she'd already started planning. They descended into the valley as daylight faded. By the time Elias pulled the wagon up to the cabin, snow was falling so thick they could barely see the barn 20 yards away. He helped Vivian down, grabbed her suitcase, and led her inside. The cabin was exactly what he'd described. One room with a stone fireplace, rough furniture he'd built himself, a ladder leading to a sleeping loft. The floor was packed earth. The windows were oiled paper. The whole space was maybe 15 feet square. Vivian set down her bag and walked slowly around the room, touching the table, the crude shelves, the cast-iron stove. Her face was unreadable. I know it's not, Elias started. It's warm, Vivian interrupted him. It's dry. It's mine. She turned to face him. That's more than I had yesterday. Something in Elias's chest loosened. I sleep in the loft. You can have the main room. There's blankets in that trunk, and I'll... Mr. Mercer... Vivian's voice was quiet but firm. We both know the practical realities. It's December in Montana. One fire, one heat source, separate sleeping arrangements are a luxury neither of us can afford right now. Elias felt heat rise in his face. Miss Hale, I would never presume... I'm not suggesting anything improper. I'm suggesting we be realistic. We'll marry as soon as it's practical, correct? Yes. I thought after you'd settled, we could... Why wait? Vivian moved to warm her hands at the fire. We both came here with the same intention. Waiting won't change anything except give us both time to overthink. You just arrived 4 hours ago. And we've been honest with each other, which is more than most couples manage before a wedding. She looked at him over her shoulder. Unless you're having second thoughts? No, I'm not. I just... Elias struggled for words. I want you to be sure. I'm sure I have no better options. I'm sure I'd rather build something with an honest stranger than return to Boston and fade away in poverty. I'm sure that waiting won't make this any easier. Vivian straightened. The Talbots are your nearest neighbors, you said? Yes. Do they have a pastor, justice of the peace? Talbot's wife's father was a preacher. He's getting on in years, but he still performs ceremonies. Then in the morning, we go see them. Vivian's tone was matter of fact, like she was planning a supply run. Get married properly. Come back and start working. Elias stared at her. This woman had stepped off a train 4 hours ago and was now calmly arranging their wedding like a business transaction. You don't want time to think about it, he asked. I've been thinking about it for 2 months, Mr. Mercer, since the day I mailed my first letter. Vivian met his eyes. I told you, I'm not here for romance. I'm here to survive. Marriage makes this arrangement legal and legitimate. Why complicate it with sentiment? Because Elias had been raised to believe marriage meant something. Because despite everything, some part of him still hoped for connection, not just convenience. But looking at Vivian's determined face, he realized she was right. They'd both come here with eyes open. Delaying wouldn't change the fundamentals. All right, he said, we'll go to the Talbots tomorrow. Good. Vivian returned her attention to the fire. Now, what do you have for supper? I haven't eaten since yesterday. That snapped Elias out of his daze. You haven't... Why didn't you say something? I'm saying it now. He moved to the shelves where he kept supplies. Salt pork, beans, cornmeal, coffee. Not much else. It's not fancy. I didn't expect fancy. While Elias prepared food, Vivian explored the cabin more thoroughly. She opened the trunk, examined the blankets, checked the stove, looked at his minimal dishware and cooking equipment. You've been doing this alone, she observed. Yes, ma'am. How long? 3 years, since I bought the place. That's a long time to be isolated. Elias didn't answer. He focused on frying salt pork, boiling water for coffee. The cabin filled with the smell of cooking meat and wood smoke. When he turned around, Vivian was watching him with that analytical gaze. Your leg, she said. Logging accident you mentioned? Crushed it when a tree fell wrong. Thought I'd lose it for a while. Elias set plates on the table. Healed crooked. Hurts when it's cold or when I've been riding all day. Does it affect your work? Makes some things harder. I manage. I'll help with anything that requires running or climbing. It was a practical offer, not pity. Elias nodded. Appreciated. They sat across from each other at the rough table. The food was simple, fried pork, beans, cornbread, bitter coffee. But Vivian ate like she was starving, which she probably was. When did you last have a real meal? Elias asked. Define real. Vivian sipped her coffee, made a face at the bitterness, but kept drinking. I've been stretching pennies for months. Bread and cheese, mostly. Sometimes soup, if I could afford it. Jesus, why didn't you ask for help? From who? She set down her cup. I had no family, no friends with money to spare, and I wasn't about to beg. Pride's a cold companion. So is hunger, but at least pride doesn't judge you. Vivian took another bite. This is good, by the way. Simple, but good. They ate in silence. Outside, wind howled around the cabin. Snow piled against the walls. The fire crackled. Elias found himself studying Vivian when she wasn't looking. The sharp angles of her face, the way she ate efficiently, no wasted motion, the careful way she rationed her coffee like it was precious. This woman was a survivor. She'd been beaten down by life and had kept getting up. There was steel in her. He wondered what she saw when she looked at him. A broken cowboy? A desperate man? Someone worth the gamble she'd taken? You're staring, Vivian said without looking up. Sorry. Don't be sorry. Just tell me what you're thinking. Elias considered lying, then remembered their agreement about honesty. I'm thinking I might have gotten lucky when you answered my advertisement. She did look up then. Because I'm not complaining about the cabin. Because you're not pretending this is something it's not. Because you're practical. Because, he struggled. Because you're here. Something softened in Vivian's expression. Not much, but enough to notice. I'll try to be worth the train fare. You already are. They finished eating. Vivian insisted on cleaning up despite Elias's protests. She moved around the cabin like she was mapping territory, noting where everything was stored, how things worked. There's a creek about 50 yards east, Elias said, but it'll be frozen now. We haul water from the barn well. I'll help in the morning. Vivian, Miss Hale, just Vivian. If we're marrying tomorrow, we can skip formalities. Vivian, Elias tried again, you just traveled 3,000 miles. You're exhausted. You don't need to. I need to be useful. She turned to face him. I need to prove I can do this. Not to you, to myself. Do you understand? Elias did understand. He'd felt the same thing when he'd first arrived in Montana. The desperate need to prove he wasn't broken, wasn't finished. I understand, he said quietly. The wind outside grew stronger. Snow hammered against the walls. The cabin creaked but held firm. Vivian moved to the window, peered out at the storm. How bad does it get? Bad. Last winter we had drifts 10 feet deep, lost half my herd. What do we do if that happens again? Keep the animals close, break ice on the creek, ration feed, survive. That's your plan? Just survive? That's all anyone can do out here. Vivian was quiet for a moment. No, survival is the minimum. I want to build something better than minimum. On a Montana cattle ranch in the middle of nowhere? Why not? She turned from the window. You've got land, livestock, timber, water, all the basics. What you don't have is enough hands to maximize it. There's only 2 of us. For now. But 2 is better than 1. We expand the herd, improve the cabin, maybe hire seasonal help when we can afford it. Build something we can actually sell someday instead of just scraping by. Elias felt something unfamiliar stir in his chest. Hope, maybe. Or ambition he'd buried years ago. You've been thinking about this, he said. I've been thinking about nothing else since I mailed that first letter. Vivian's eyes were bright. I didn't come here to just exist, Elias. I came here to build. Hearing her use his first name sent an odd jolt through him, made this real in a way it hadn't been before. Then we'll build, he said. The storm battered the cabin all night. Elias gave Vivian the loft, more privacy, warmer since heat rose. He bedded down near the fire with extra blankets, but sleep came slowly. He lay awake listening to the wind scream and the fire pop, thinking about the woman sleeping above him. A stranger he'd marry in the morning, a partner he barely knew. This was insane, reckless, probably doomed, but for the first time in 3 years, Elias didn't feel alone. That had to count for something. When he finally slept, he dreamed of spring, green grass, healthy cattle, a larger cabin with real windows. Vivian laughing at something he'd said, though he couldn't remember the joke. He woke before dawn to find Vivian already up, fully dressed, feeding the fire. Morning, she said. Storms passed. Should we go see your neighbors? Elias sat up, running a hand through his hair. You're serious about this? I'm always serious. Vivian poured coffee from the pot she'd already prepared. Unless you've changed your mind. No, He accepted the cup she offered. Most women would want a proper courtship, time to know each other. I'm not most women, and we don't have time to waste playing courtship games while winter gets worse. Vivian wrapped her hands around her own cup. I know enough. You're honest, you work hard, and you're not cruel. That's more than many marriages start with. Elias couldn't argue with that logic. The Talbots will think we're crazy. Let them think what they want. They left after breakfast, riding the wagon east through snow that had drifted 3 feet deep in places. The horses struggled, the wheels stuck repeatedly. But they pushed on. The Talbot homestead appeared around midday, a cluster of buildings larger and more established than Elias's place. Smoke rose from multiple chimneys. Children played in the yard. Martha Talbot came out when she heard the wagon, wiping her hands on her apron. She was a sturdy woman in her 40s with a kind face and sharp eyes. Elias Mercer, she called. Didn't expect to see you until spring. And who's... She stopped as Vivian climbed down from the wagon. Mrs. Talbot, this is Vivian Hale, from Boston. She's... Elias hesitated. I'm as intended, Vivian finished calmly. We'd like to be married, today, if your father-in-law is available. Martha's eyebrows shot up. She looked between them, clearly reassessing. Well, that's... direct. It's practical, Vivian said. We're both adults. We've discussed terms. There's no point delaying. Terms? Martha almost smiled. You make it sound like a business arrangement. It is. Honest partnership, mutual benefit, legal legitimacy. Those are the terms. Martha studied Vivian for a long moment, then seemed to reach some decision. You've got spine. I'll give you that. Come inside, warm up, we'll talk. The Talbot cabin was warm and lived in, smelling of bread and wood smoke. Martha's husband Robert was out with the livestock, but her 3 children, 2 girls and a boy, stared at Vivian with open curiosity. "You're really from Boston?" the older girl asked. "I am." "Is it wonderful there?" Vivian considered the question seriously. "It's crowded, expensive. If you're poor, it's suffocating, but the buildings are tall and there are libraries and theaters and museums. Do you miss it?" "No." The answer was immediate. I needed space to breathe. Martha served coffee while sending her oldest daughter to fetch her father from his cottage behind the main house. While they waited, she asked Vivian careful questions about her background, her skills, her expectations. Vivian answered everything directly. No embellishment, no pretense. Elias watched Martha's expression shift from skepticism to cautious respect. When Reverend Clayton arrived, a white-haired man who moved slowly but had alert, kind eyes, Martha had already made up her mind. "Father, these 2 want to marry, today." Clayton looked at Elias. "Son, I married you?" "No, sir. I've never been married." The old man turned to Vivian. "And you, miss? Never married? No impediments. This is my choice, freely made." "Why the rush?" "Because it's practical and honest, and waiting serves no purpose." Vivian met his gaze steadily. "I'm not drunk, not coerced, not pregnant. I'm simply a woman who knows what she wants and sees no reason to pretend otherwise." Clayton's weathered face creased into a smile. "I like you. You remind me of my late wife. She was practical, too." He looked at Elias. "You understand what you're taking on. This one's got opinions." "Yes, sir. That's part of why I'm here." "Good answer." Clayton nodded. "Martha, fetch my Bible. Let's make this legal." The ceremony was simple. No flowers, no music. Just Clayton reading from his worn Bible while Martha and Robert served as witnesses. The children watched wide-eyed. "Do you, Elias Mercer, take this woman?" Elias said yes. "Do you, Vivian Hale, take this man?" Vivian said yes. No hesitation from either of them. "Then, by the authority granted me, I pronounce you husband and wife." And just like that, it was done. Elias and Vivian were married. Martha insisted they stay for a meal. Robert came in from the barn, congratulated them with bemused warmth. The children peppered Vivian with questions about Boston. But as afternoon faded, Elias felt urgency building. "We should get back before dark." "Stay the night," Martha offered. "We've got room." "Thank you, but no." Vivian stood. "We need to get home." Home. She'd said it naturally, like it was already true. They rode back through the afternoon, following the trail they'd broken that morning. The horses were tired. So were they. But neither complained. As they crested the ridge above Elias's valley, Vivian spoke quietly. "This is permanent now. Legal." "Yes." "Are you afraid?" Elias thought about it. "Terrified." "Me too." She glanced at him. "But less afraid than I was yesterday." "Why?" "Because yesterday I was alone. Today I have a partner." They descended into the valley as the sun set behind the mountains, painting snow gold and pink. Smoke still rose from the cabin chimney. Elias helped Vivian down from the wagon. Their hands touched. Neither pulled away immediately. "Welcome home, Mrs. Mercer," he said quietly. Vivian looked up at him, really looked, like she was seeing him for the first time. "Welcome home, Mr. Mercer," she answered. Then she turned and walked into the cabin, their cabin, and Elias followed her inside. The fire needed building up. There was water to haul, animals to check, 100 small tasks before nightfall. But for one moment, standing in the doorway, Elias let himself feel something he hadn't felt in years. Not quite happiness, not yet, but possibility. Real, tangible possibility that maybe, just maybe, they could make this work. Outside, the first wolves of the evening began to howl in the distant hills. Neither Elias nor Vivian seemed to notice. They had work to do. The first week of marriage taught them both that survival demanded more than determination. It demanded blood. Vivian woke on their 4th morning together to find Elias already gone from the cabin. She dressed quickly in the pre-dawn darkness, pulled on the heavy coat he'd given her, too large, smelling of smoke and leather, and stepped outside into air so cold it burned her lungs. The sky was still black, Stars blazed overhead with an intensity she'd never seen in Boston. No city lights to drown them out here, just endless darkness and the white expanse of snow that seemed to glow faintly in the starlight. She found Elias in the barn, mucking out stalls by lantern light. His breath fogged the air. His hands were raw and cracked from the cold. "You should have woken me," Vivian said. He looked up, startled. "You need rest." "I need to work." She grabbed a second shovel leaning against the wall. "Show me what to do." "Vivian, Elias." She met his eyes. "We agreed. Partnership. That means I pull my weight." He hesitated, then nodded toward the far stalls. "Start there. Pile the soiled hay outside. We'll spread fresh straw after." The work was brutal. Within 20 minutes, Vivian's back ached, and her hands were blistered despite the gloves Elias had found for her. The smell was overwhelming: manure, wet hay, animal sweat. Her arms trembled with each shovelful, but she didn't stop. They worked in silence as dawn broke gray and cold. When they finished, Vivian's muscles screamed and sweat had frozen on her skin despite the exertion. "You did good," Elias said quietly. "I can barely lift my arms." "That'll pass. Gets easier." "When?" "Month or two." Vivian laughed. A short, sharp sound. "Wonderful." They hauled water from the well, breaking a skin of ice that had formed overnight. Fed the horses, the chickens, checked the cattle gathered near the barn where Elias had put out hay. "We're low on feed," he said, studying the diminishing pile. "I didn't plan on an early winter." "How long will it last?" 3 weeks, maybe 4 if we ration." "And then?" Elias was quiet. "Then we start losing animals." Back in the cabin, Vivian made breakfast while Elias examined their supplies. Flour, cornmeal, beans, salt pork, coffee. Enough for maybe 6 weeks if they were careful. "I should have stocked more," he muttered. "You didn't know I was coming until 2 months ago." Vivian cracked eggs into a pan. "And you couldn't afford to waste money on supplies you might not need." "Still should have." "Stop." She turned from the stove. "We're here now. What matters is what we do next." Elias rubbed his face. He looked exhausted. "I need to ride into Laurel Creek, get more supplies before the next storm hits." "When?" "Tomorrow. Maybe the day after if weather holds." "I'm coming with you." "It's a full day's ride each way. Hard travel." "I don't care." Vivian served eggs onto tin plates. "I need to see the town, know what's available, meet people who might matter later." "It's not Boston, Vivian. Laurel Creek is rough. 60 people, maybe. Half of them spend their days drunk." "I didn't expect Boston." She sat across from him. "But I need to understand our world, all of it." Elias studied her, then nodded slowly. "All right, we'll go together." They spent the rest of that day preparing. Elias made a list of supplies: flour, salt, beans, ammunition, lamp oil, nails. Vivian added thread, needles, fabric if they could afford it. "I can mend what we have," she said, "but eventually things wear through. We can't afford much." "I know, I'm prioritizing." She looked at the list. "How much money do we have?" Elias pulled a small leather pouch from a locked box under his bed, counted out bills and coins. $43. That needs to last until spring. Vivian did the math in her head. It wasn't enough, not even close. "What about selling cattle?" she asked. "Not until spring. Nobody's buying now, and even if they were, we need every head to rebuild the herd." "Then we're operating on thin margins." "We've been operating on thin margins since I bought this place." Elias put the money back. "It's how frontier life works." That night, as wind howled outside and the fire burned low, Vivian lay in the loft thinking about their precarious situation. One bad storm, one sick animal, one broken wheel or injured horse. Any of those things could tip them from struggling to catastrophic. She'd known frontier life would be hard, but knowing and experiencing were different things. Below, she heard Elias moving restlessly. He wasn't sleeping either. "Elias?" she called softly. "Yeah?" "Are you afraid we won't make it?" Long silence. Then, "Every single day." "But you keep trying. What else is there?" Vivian stared at the dark ceiling. "Building something better. That's just surviving with extra steps." "No." She rolled onto her side. Surviving is reacting. Building is planning. There's a difference. She heard him shift below. What would you build if you could? A real house, not just a cabin. Multiple rooms, real windows, a proper kitchen, maybe a root cellar for storage. Vivian's voice grew stronger. Expand the herd to 50 head. Plant crops in spring. Build relationships with other ranchers. Create something we could actually sell for profit someday instead of just scraping by season to season. That takes capital we don't have. Not all at once, but piece by piece, year by year. She paused. We're both young enough. We've got time. Elias was quiet for so long she thought he'd fallen asleep. Then, my father used to say hope was for people who couldn't face reality. Your father sounds like he gave up. He drank himself to death when I was 16. Vivian absorbed that. I'm sorry. Don't be. Just explaining why I don't think much about building castles in the sky. I'm not talking about castles. I'm talking about a house that doesn't leak when it rains. Cattle that don't starve every winter. A life that's more than just white-knuckling through each season. Another long pause. You really believe we can do that? I believe we can try. That's enough for now. The next morning they woke to find 6 inches of fresh snow and a sky promising more. Elias stood at the window, jaw tight. We need to go today, he said, before it gets worse. They left within the hour. The wagon struggled through deep drifts. The horses strained. Twice they had to stop and dig out the wheels. But they pushed on, following a trail that was barely visible under the snow. Laurel Creek appeared around midday, a collection of rough buildings huddled around a single muddy street. The general store, a saloon, a blacksmith, a few houses. That was it. Vivian had expected rough, but the reality was somehow worse. This wasn't a town. It was barely a settlement. Elias pulled the wagon up to the general store and helped her down. Inside, a pot-bellied stove radiated heat. The proprietor, a heavy man named Hutchins, looked up from his ledger. Mercer, didn't expect to see you until spring. His eyes moved to Vivian. And who's this? My wife, Vivian. Hutchins' eyebrows rose. Wife? Since when? Since 5 days ago. Elias pulled out his list. Need supplies. While Elias negotiated prices, Vivian explored the store. The selection was limited. Basic staples, some tools, ammunition, cheap fabric, tobacco. Nothing fancy, nothing frivolous. Just survival goods. She picked out thread and needles. A small packet of seeds for spring planting. A jar of honey, expensive but worth it. At the counter, Hutchins was shaking his head. Can't do all this for $40, Elias. Not with freight costs what they are. Then what can you do? Hutchins calculated on a scrap of paper. I can give you half the flour, half the beans, the ammunition, and the lamp oil. Rest you'll have to wait on. We can't wait. We need... I'll trade for the rest, Vivian said. Both men looked at her. Trade what? Hutchins asked. Work. I can sew, mend clothes, make shirts, alter dresses. You must have customers who need those services. Hutchins scratched his chin. Might. Sarah Gibbs was asking about getting her husband's coat repaired, and there's a woman up north who wanted a wedding dress made. I can do both, and anything else you need. Vivian met his eyes. Quality work. Fair prices. Vivian, you don't have to, Elias started. Yes, I do. She turned to him. We need these supplies. This is how we get them. Hutchins looked between them, then shrugged. All right. You do the work. I'll credit it against your account. Fair? Fair. They left with the wagon half-loaded, and Vivian committed to a week's worth of sewing. As they headed back toward the ranch, Elias was quiet. You didn't have to do that, he said finally. Yes, I did. We're partners, remember? That means using every skill we have. I should be able to provide... Elias, Vivian cut him off. That kind of thinking is useless. We provide together or we fail together. There's no room for pride. He absorbed that. You're tougher than I expected. Good. Because it's about to get worse. She was right. The storm hit that night with a fury that rattled the cabin walls. Wind screamed like something alive and murderous. Snow fell so thick they couldn't see the barn 20 feet away. Elias stood at the window, staring into the whiteout. The animals. We brought them in close, Vivian said. They've got shelter. If they scatter in this, we'll never find them. Then we make sure they don't scatter. She grabbed her coat. Elias spun around. No, absolutely not. You're not going out in this. Neither are you, not alone. Vivian, we do this together or not at all. She was already pulling on the boots he'd given her, too big, stuffed with rags to fit. You can't stop me. For a moment, Elias looked like he might try. Then something shifted in his expression, fear giving way to resignation, or maybe respect. Stay close to me, he said. Don't let go of the rope. He'd strung a guide rope from the cabin to the barn earlier that day, anticipating this. Now they clipped themselves to it and stepped out into hell. The wind hit like a physical blow. Snow blinded them instantly. The cold was so intense Vivian couldn't breathe. She gripped the rope with both hands and followed Elias's shadow through the storm. The barn loomed out of the darkness. They stumbled inside, gasping. The animals were agitated, horses stamping, chickens squawking, cattle pressing against the walls. Check for gaps in the walls, Elias shouted over the wind. Any place the cold's getting through. They worked frantically, stuffing cracks with straw, securing loose boards. Vivian's hands went numb within minutes. Her face felt like frozen meat, but she kept moving. A sudden gust tore part of the roof loose. Snow poured through the gap. Damn it! Elias grabbed a ladder. I have to patch that before the whole roof goes. You can't go up there in this. If we lose the barn, we lose everything. He was already climbing. Vivian watched him disappear into the darkness above, her heart hammering. The wind howled. The barn shook. She could hear him moving up there, hammering boards, shouting curses. Then silence. Elias? She called. No answer. Elias! A crash from above. Something falling. Vivian grabbed the lantern and climbed the ladder. At the top, she found Elias sprawled across a beam, one hand gripping the wood, the other clutching his leg. I slipped, he gasped. Landed wrong. My leg. The bad one. The leg that never healed right. Can you move it? I don't know. He tried, then hissed in pain. Can't put weight on it. Vivian made a decision. She climbed onto the beam, got her shoulder under his arm. We're going down. Now. The roof. We'll wait. Move. They descended slowly, Elias half falling onto her. At the bottom, she lowered him onto a pile of hay. His face was gray with pain. I need to see it, she said. It's fine. Elias, shut up and let me look. She pulled up his pant leg. Even through the long underwear, she could see swelling. When she pressed gently, he went white. It's not broken, she said, but you've wrenched it badly. You can't climb anymore tonight. The roof. I'll do it. No, you're not. Watch me. Before he could stop her, Vivian grabbed the hammer and nails and climbed back up. The wind shrieked through the gap. Snow stung her face, but she'd watched Elias work, knew what needed to be done. She hammered boards across the opening, fingers so cold she could barely grip the nails. 1 board, 2, 3. The gap narrowed. The wind lessened. When she climbed back down, Elias was staring at her with an expression she couldn't read. That was stupid, he said. That was necessary. She knelt beside him. Can you walk? With help. They made their way back to the cabin using the guide rope, Elias leaning heavily on her. Inside, she lowered him into the chair by the fire and examined his leg properly. The old injury had swollen badly, not broken, but damaged. He'd be limping worse than ever for days, maybe weeks. I'm sorry, Elias said quietly. For what? For being useless. Stop. Vivian wrapped his leg with strips of cloth soaked in cold water. You're not useless. You're injured. There's a difference. I should be able to Elias. She looked up at him. If you finish that sentence with anything about what you should be able to do, I'm going to hit you. You climbed onto a roof in a blizzard to save our animals. You didn't fail, you got hurt. Those aren't the same thing. He absorbed that, jaw working. I hate being weak. You're not weak, you're human. She stood, moved to make coffee. And right now this human is going to rest that leg while I handle the outside work for a few days. You can't, I can, and I will. You've been doing everything alone for 3 years. Time to learn how to accept help. The storm lasted 3 days. During that time, Vivian learned what frontier survival really meant. She hauled water in the freezing darkness, broke ice with a sledgehammer until her arms screamed, fed animals, mucked stalls, carried wood. Every task took twice as long as it should have because she was learning as she went. Her hands blistered, then bled, then formed calluses. Her back ached constantly. She lost weight she couldn't afford to lose. But she didn't quit. Elias watched from the cabin, unable to help, his frustration obvious. Vivian could see what it cost him, this proud, self-reliant man forced to sit idle while his wife did his work. On the third night, when she stumbled inside after the final barn check, barely able to stand, Elias spoke quietly. "You're going to kill yourself." "Not yet." Vivian collapsed into the chair. "Tomorrow, maybe?" "This isn't what you signed up for." "I signed up for partnership. That means picking up the slack when needed." She pulled off her boots. Her feet were blistered and bleeding. "You do the same for me." "That's different." "Why? Because you're the man?" Vivian looked at him. "That's pride talking. We're past that now." Elias was silent for a long moment. "I've been alone so long, I forgot how to let someone help." "Then learn, because I'm not going anywhere." Something shifted in the cabin's atmosphere, a wall coming down. My wife, my almost wife before, Elias stared at the fire. She left because I couldn't be what she needed, strong, successful, perfect. I don't need perfect, I need real. What if real isn't enough? Vivian leaned forward. "Elias, look at me." He did. "Real is all we've got. Your damaged leg, my bleeding hands, this cabin that barely keeps out the cold, our dwindling supplies and dying animals. That's our reality. We can either accept it and work with it, or we can waste energy pretending it's something else." "You make it sound simple." "It is simple. Not easy, but simple." She stood, wincing. "Now I'm going to sleep. Tomorrow, we do it all again." The storm finally broke on the fourth day. Elias's leg had improved enough to walk with a cane he'd fashioned from a branch. Together they assessed the damage. 2 cattle were missing, likely scattered in the storm. 1 section of fence was down. The chicken coop had partially collapsed, killing 3 birds. But the barn still stood. The cabin was intact. They'd survived. "Could have been worse," Elias said. "Could have been better." Vivian surveyed the damage. "But we're alive. That's something." They spent the next week repairing damage and searching for the missing cattle. Found one frozen to death in a ravine. The other had simply vanished, probably taken by wolves. Their herd was down to 21 head. "We can't afford to lose any more," Elias said grimly. That night they heard the wolves for the first time. The howling started just after dark, distant at first, then closer. Multiple voices, harmonizing in a sound that raised every hair on Vivian's neck. "How many?" she asked. Elias stood at the window, rifle in hand. "Pack sounds like 6 or 7, maybe more." "Will they come for the cattle?" "Eventually, they're testing us, seeing how we react." "What do we do?" "Keep watch, keep the animals close. Be ready." The wolves circled for 3 nights. They never approached close enough to shoot, but their presence was constant. The cattle grew nervous. The horses spooked at shadows. On the 4th night, Vivian was in the barn doing a late check when she heard something outside. Not howling. Something closer. The soft sound of paws in snow. She grabbed the rifle Elias had insisted she carry, turned down the lantern, waited. A shadow moved past the barn door. Her heart hammered. She'd only fired a rifle twice in practice. Elias had shown her how to load, aim, shoot, but she'd never pointed one at a living thing. The shadow moved again, definitely canine, definitely large. Vivian raised the rifle, hand shaking. Through the gap in the door, she saw it clearly. A gray wolf, massive, its eyes reflecting lantern light. It was testing the barn, looking for a way in. She aimed. Her finger found the trigger. But she couldn't make herself fire. The wolf was just an animal, hungry, trying to survive like they were. Then she thought of the cattle, their dwindling herd, the food and money each animal represented. The wolf stepped closer. Vivian fired. The blast was deafening. The wolf yelped and bolted. She didn't know if she'd hit it or just scared it. Didn't matter. It was gone. Elias burst into the barn seconds later, his own rifle raised. What happened? Wolf. At the door. Vivian's hands were shaking. I shot at it. Did you hit it? I don't know. Maybe. It ran. Elias checked outside, came back. No blood. You probably just winged it or missed entirely. But you did the right thing. It was just hungry. So are we. He took the rifle from her trembling hands. Out here, you protect what's yours, or you lose it. That's not cruelty. That's survival. Vivian knew he was right, but she still felt sick. They doubled their watch after that. One person always awake, always armed. The wolves kept their distance, but the threat remained constant. Christmas came and went with little acknowledgement. They couldn't afford celebration. Every day was the same. Work, watch, survive. But on Christmas Eve, Elias surprised her. He'd been working on something in the barn, disappearing for hours. Vivian had assumed it was repairs. Instead, he brought in a small wooden box he'd made himself. Rough, but carefully crafted. I know we said no gifts, he started. Vivian opened the box. Inside was the deed to the ranch. Both their names on it now, signed and legal. It's half yours, Elias said. Not because you married me. Because you earned it. Everything you've done these past weeks, the work, the storm, the wolves, you've earned equal ownership. Vivian stared at the document. She'd arrived in Montana with nothing. Now she owned half a ranch. It wasn't much by most standards, but it was hers. I don't know what to say, she managed. Don't say anything, just... Elias hesitated. Just know that this partnership is real, legal, permanent. You're not just helping me survive. This is yours too. For the first time since arriving, Vivian felt tears threatening. She blinked them back. Thank you. You've earned it 10 times over. That night they sat by the fire in silence. Outside, wolves howled, snow fell, the wind scraped against the cabin walls. But inside, something had shifted. They weren't strangers anymore. Weren't just two desperate people making a bargain. They were partners, real ones. And when the wolves howled again, closer this time, both of them stood and grabbed their rifles without discussion. Whatever came next, they'd face it together. The wolves came for real 3 nights later. Elias woke to the sound of cattle screaming, a noise he'd heard before but never got used to. Panic, pure animal terror. He was on his feet before his eyes fully opened, grabbing his rifle. Vivian! She was already climbing down from the loft, fully dressed. She'd started sleeping in her clothes after the first wolf sighting. Smart. How many? She asked, reaching for the shotgun. Don't know, but the herd spooked bad. They ran for the barn, no guide rope this time, just stumbling through knee-deep snow in the darkness. The screaming got louder. Mixed with it now was something worse, growling, snarling, the wet sound of teeth. Elias threw open the barn door and his stomach dropped. The wolves had gotten inside somehow. 3 of them, maybe 4, dark shapes moving fast in the chaos. The cattle were pressed against the far wall, trampling each other in terror. One cow was already down, throat torn open, blood spreading black across the hay. Get back! Elias shoved Vivian behind him and fired. The blast lit up the barn for a heartbeat. One wolf yelped and retreated, but the others held their ground, circling the downed cow, protecting their kill. Vivian raised the shotgun. Where do I aim? Center mass, don't think, just shoot. She fired. The recoil nearly knocked her down, but she stayed upright. One wolf twisted and fell. Not dead, but wounded. The remaining wolves backed toward the hole they'd torn in the barn's back wall. Elias fired again, splintering wood near one's head. They bolted through the gap and vanished into the night. For a moment, the only sound was the terrified breathing of the remaining cattle and the horrible wet gasping of the dying cow. Elias moved to the animal. Her eyes rolled white. Blood pumped from the wound in her throat. She was maybe 2 years old, pregnant. He'd been counting on her calf for spring. Can we save her? Vivian asked quietly. No. Elias pulled his knife. Best I can do is make it quick. He cut her throat the rest of the way. The cow shuddered once and went still. 20 head now, down from 30 in just 2 months. Vivian stood frozen, shotgun still gripped tight, staring at the blood. You all right? Elias asked. No. Her voice was flat. But I'll manage. They spent the rest of the night barricading the hole, moving the remaining cattle into the cabin's main room, cramped and chaotic, but safer. The wounded wolf had crawled off to die somewhere. The dead cow they left for now. Deal with it in daylight. By dawn, they were both exhausted, covered in blood, and worse. The cattle milled restlessly in the tiny cabin, filling it with the smell of manure and fear. "This can't continue," Vivian said. She sat on the floor, back against the wall, shotgun across her lap. "We can't keep losing animals." "I know." "So what do we do?" Elias stared at the fire. His leg throbbed, his hands shook from adrenaline crash. "We hunt them." "Hunt wolves?" "That's necessary." He met her eyes. "They've got our scent now. Know we've got easy food. They'll keep coming back until we're picked clean or we stop them." "How do we hunt a wolf pack?" "Carefully." Elias reloaded his rifle with hands that barely worked. "We track them to their den, set traps, bait them, pick them off one by one until the pack breaks up and moves on." "That could take weeks." "You have somewhere better to be?" Vivian almost smiled. "Fair point. They butchered the dead cow that morning, salvaging what meat they could. Elias showed Vivian how to cut, how to separate muscle from bone, how to waste nothing. Her hands were steady, but her face was pale. "You're doing good," he said. "I'm covered in blood and cutting up an animal that was alive 6 hours ago." "That's frontier life. I hate it." "Good. The day you stop hating this is the day you've lost something important." Elias set aside a section of flank. "But hating it doesn't mean you can't do it." They worked in silence. By noon they had meat wrapped and stored in the cold barn, bones saved for stock, hides stretched for tanning. Nothing wasted. Couldn't afford waste. That afternoon Elias took Vivian into the woods to teach her tracking. "Look here," he pointed to marks in the snow. 4 toes, claws. That's wolf. See how deep the print is? Big animal, probably the alpha." Vivian studied the tracks. "How do you know it's the alpha?" "Leading the others. See?" He indicated more prints following the first. Pack structure. The leader breaks trail. Rest follow. They tracked the wolves for 2 hours, moving slowly, rifles ready. The trail led north into rougher country, steep slopes and dense pine. Several times Elias made Vivian stop and just listen. "What am I listening for?" she whispered. "Everything. Wind direction, birds, silence. Wolves are smart. They watch back trails. We need to know if they're watching us. This is insane. Welcome to Montana." They found the den around 3 in the afternoon, a cave entrance halfway up a rocky slope. Fresh prints everywhere. Bones scattered outside. The smell of wolf musk strong even in the cold air. 7, Elias counted prints. Maybe 8. That's a big pack. "Can we take them?" "Not in a straight fight. We'd be torn apart." He studied the terrain. "But we can make this ground work for us." Over the next 3 days, they set their trap. Elias positioned snares along the wolves' hunting trails, set out poison bait, strychnine mixed with deer meat he'd shot, built a shooting blind on the ridge above the den where they could watch approaches. Vivian learned fast how to set a snare that would hold a wolf's weight, how to disguise human scent, how to move through snow without leaving obvious tracks. "You're a natural," Elias said on the 3rd day. "I just pay attention." Vivian adjusted a snare trigger. "My father used to say observation was everything in business." Same principle applies here. "What kind of business?" "Textiles. He had a factory in Boston, employed 80 people. Her voice went flat. "Then his partner embezzled everything and fled to Europe. The factory closed. My father drank himself sick, died 6 months later." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. He made bad choices. Trusted the wrong person. That's not tragedy. That's stupidity." She tested the snare. "I won't make the same mistake." "You trusted me." Vivian looked at him. "Did I? Or did I make a calculated risk based on available options? Is there a difference?" "I don't know yet." On the 4th night, they got their first kill. The poisoned bait worked. They found a dead wolf in the morning, a female, foam around her mouth. Elias shot her twice more to be sure. Then they dragged the carcass away from the den. "1 down," he said. 6 or 7 to go. The pack got more cautious after that. Avoided the bait. skirted the snares. They were learning. We need a new approach, Vivian said. Elias agreed. We go active. Hunt them instead of waiting for them to come to us. How? We stake out the den, wait for them to return, pick them off when they're exposed. It was a terrible plan. Dangerous. But it was all they had. They spent the next 2 nights in the shooting blind, a rough shelter of pine branches and snow that barely cut the wind. Temperatures dropped below 0. Even wrapped in every blanket they owned, Vivian's teeth chattered. Tell me something, she said on the second night, just to stay awake. Like what? Anything. Your childhood, your family, something that makes you more than just the man I married a month ago. Elias was quiet. Then, my mother died when I was 8, pneumonia. My father never recovered. He worked the logging camps, drank his pay, came home to beat me and my sister. You have a sister? Had. She ran off when she was 15, married some gambler heading to California. I haven't heard from her in 10 years. Do you miss her? Every day. His voice was rough. She was the only person who gave a damn about me. Then she was gone, and I was alone with a drunk who blamed me for existing. Vivian absorbed that. How did you get out? Worked the camps myself at 16, saved every penny. When I had enough, I left. Never looked back. He shifted position, trying to ease his leg. Tried to make something of myself. Got the logging job. Met Sarah. Thought I'd finally built a real life. Then the accident. Elias stared into the darkness. And I learned that everything you build can collapse in a heartbeat. Is that why you came here? To hide? Maybe. Or maybe to start over where nobody knew what I'd lost. Vivian was quiet. Then, my mother died too. I was 12. After that, it was just me and my father and the business. He taught me everything: accounting, management, quality control. Said I had a head for numbers. Did you? Yes. But nobody wants to hire a woman to manage their books, no matter how good she is. Bitterness crept into her voice. After he died, I had nothing. No inheritance, no prospects, just debts and a reputation as that poor Hale girl. So you answered my advertisement. So I answered your advertisement. She looked at him. And here we are. 2 people who lost everything, freezing in the Montana wilderness, waiting to shoot wolves. Not exactly the American dream. No, but it's ours. Movement below cut off their conversation. Wolves returning to the den, 3 of them, moving single file through the snow. Elias raised his rifle. Beside him, Vivian did the same. They'd practiced this. Coordinated fire. 2 targets, 2 shots, simultaneous. The leader, Elias breathed. You take the rear wolf on my count. Vivian nodded, eye to her rifle sight. 3, 2, 1. They fired together. Both wolves dropped. The third bolted, but Elias's second shot caught it mid-stride. It tumbled, tried to rise, fell again. They scrambled down from the blind. Elias reached the wounded wolf first. It snarled at him, trying to drag itself away on shattered front legs. He shot it in the head. 3 wolves dead in the snow. The pack was broken now. The survivors would scatter, find new territory. Is it over? Vivian asked. For now. Elias looked at the carcasses. They'll remember this place is dangerous. Might be months before another pack tries this valley. They hauled the bodies away from the den, then trudged back toward the ranch. Dawn was breaking. They'd been out all night. Elias's leg was screaming, and Vivian looked ready to collapse. But they'd done it. Defended what was theirs. Back at the cabin, they found the remaining cattle calm for the first time in days. The horses were relaxed. Even the chickens seemed less agitated. They know, Elias said. Animals can sense when a threat's gone. Vivian collapsed into a chair. How long before the next threat? In Montana? Could be tomorrow, could be next month. There's always something. That's a depressing thought. That's reality. She looked at him, exhausted and blood-stained and tougher than she'd been a month ago. I'm starting to understand why you're the way you are. What way? Hard, practical, like you've filed off every soft edge. Elias sat across from her. You have to, out here. Soft gets you killed. Is there anything left under all that hardness? Or did Montana burn it all away? The question hit harder than Elias expected. He thought about it, really thought. I don't know, he said finally. I was somebody else before. Somebody who believed in things. Hope, future, connection. He stared at his scarred hands. Then everything fell apart and that person died. What's left is just this. Someone who survives. That's sad. That's life. Vivian stood, moved to the stove to make coffee. My father used to quote Thoreau, "Most men lead lives of quiet desperation." I never understood what he meant until now. We're not desperate, we're adapting. Is there a difference? You tell me. You're the one who said calculated risk instead of trust. She poured coffee, handed him a cup. Maybe we're both just fooling ourselves, pretending we have control when really we're just reacting to whatever crisis comes next. Probably. Elias sipped the bitter coffee. But what's the alternative? Give up? No. But maybe... Vivian sat again. Maybe we stop pretending this is just about survival. Maybe we admit we're trying to build something and that it might actually matter. Might matter to who? There's nobody out here but us. It matters to us. Isn't that enough? Elias didn't have an answer for that. They spent the rest of the day recovering, cleaned weapons, mended clothes, did the basic chores that kept them alive. That night, Vivian cooked a real meal, venison from a deer Elias had shot the week before, potatoes, the last of their canned vegetables. This is good, Elias said. It's adequate. But she looked pleased. After dinner, they sat by the fire. Outside, the valley was quiet. No wolf howls, just wind and the occasional creak of settling snow. Elias? Vivian said quietly. Yeah? Thank you. For what? For teaching me, for trusting me in that blind, for... She hesitated. For treating me like an equal even when I didn't know what I was doing. You earned it. Still, a lot of men wouldn't have. She stared at the fire. A lot of men would have left me in the cabin and gone alone. A lot of men are idiots. Elias shifted to ease his leg. Besides, I needed you up there. One rifle isn't enough against 3 wolves. Always so practical. It's kept me alive this long. Vivian was quiet for a moment. Then, do you ever wish for more than just staying alive? Like what? I don't know. Happiness? Connection? Something that makes the surviving worth it? Elias stared into the flames. 3 years ago, he'd have said yes immediately. Now? I think happiness is for people with easier lives, he said finally. Out here, I'll settle for making it through winter. That's bleak. That's honest. Maybe honesty and bleakness are the same thing in Montana. Maybe. But later that night, lying in his bedroll near the fire, Elias found himself thinking about her question. Did he want more than survival? Once, he'd wanted everything. A wife who loved him, children, a successful business, respect. All the things that made a life full instead of just functional. Now those dreams seemed like they belonged to someone else. Some younger, stupider version of himself who didn't understand how quickly everything could be taken away. Above him in the loft, he heard Vivian shifting. She wasn't sleeping either. Vivian, he called quietly. Yes? Earlier, when you asked about wanting more. He paused. I lied. Silence. Then, about what part? All of it. I do want more. I'm just terrified of admitting it because wanting things is how you get hurt. More silence. Then the ladder creaked as Vivian climbed down. She moved to sit near the fire, wrapped in a blanket, her hair loose around her shoulders. I'm terrified too, she said. Every day I wake up and think this is the day it all falls apart. The day you realize you made a mistake bringing me here. The day I realize I'm not strong enough for this life. You are strong enough. How do you know? Because you're still here. Because you didn't quit when the wolves came. Because you shot a rifle in a blizzard and climbed on a roof and butchered a cow with steady hands. Elias met her eyes. You're stronger than you think. So are you. My leg. Your leg is damaged. You're not. There's a difference. They sat in silence, the fire between them. 2 damaged people trying to convince each other they were worth saving. I never told you, Vivian said finally, but the night before I left Boston, I stood on a bridge, looked down at the water, thought about how easy it would be to just step off. Elias felt something cold settle in his chest. What stopped you? Spite, mostly. A bitter smile. I was so angry at everyone who'd written me off, everyone who'd looked at me with pity or disgust. I wanted to prove them wrong more than I wanted to die. So you came here. So I came here. To the literal edge of nowhere. To marry a stranger and freeze and starve and fight wolves. She laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. And somehow, this is better than what I left behind. That's depressing. That's perspective. Elias understood. He'd had his own dark moments. Nights when the isolation felt like it would crush him. When he'd wondered if anyone would even notice if he just didn't wake up. I'm glad you didn't step off that bridge, he said quietly. Why? Because then I'd still be alone out here. And I'm starting to realize that might have killed me eventually. Vivian looked at him, really looked. We're quite a pair, aren't we? Two people who almost gave up, clinging to each other in the wilderness. Could be worse. Could be better. Could be both. She smiled, a real smile this time. You're getting philosophical in your old age. I'm 28. Ancient. They sat together until the fire burned low, not talking, just existing in the same space. It wasn't romance, wasn't even friendship yet, not really, but it was something. Connection, maybe. Recognition that they were both fighting the same fight. When Vivian finally climbed back to the loft, Elias felt her absence like a physical thing. The cabin was colder, emptier. He lay awake wondering when exactly she'd stopped being just a business arrangement and started being someone he actually cared about keeping alive. The answer troubled him more than the wolves ever had. The next morning brought news that complicated everything. Robert Talbot rode up at dawn, his horse lathered despite the cold. Elias met him outside. What's wrong? Cattle thieves. Robert dismounted, breathing hard. Hit the Morrison place 2 nights ago. Took 30 head. Shot Morrison when he tried to stop them. Is he alive? Barely. Doc says he might lose his arm. Robert's face was grim. There's a gang working the valley, 4, maybe 5 men. They've been hitting isolated ranches, taking everything that isn't nailed down. Vivian had come out, wrapped in her coat. They're targeting small operations? Anyone who can't fight back. Robert looked at Elias's modest spread. You're isolated. Got a small herd. You're exactly the kind of target they're looking for. When did this start? Week ago. But Morrison's the first one who fought back. Made them mad. Robert wiped his face. We're organizing a watch, taking turns patrolling the valley. You should join us. How many ranchers are in? 8 so far. We ride in pairs, different sectors each night. Try to cover as much ground as possible. Elias looked at his cattle. 20 head. Not enough to survive losing any. I'm in, he said. When do we start? Tonight. Robert glanced at Vivian. You'll be alone while he's out. That going to be a problem? No, Vivian said flatly. I can handle a rifle. Robert raised his eyebrows but didn't argue. All right then. Elias, meet me at the North Fork at sundown. Bring ammunition. After he left, Vivian turned to Elias. This is bad. Yes. We just drove off wolves and now we've got human predators. Welcome to frontier life. The threats never stop. They just change shape. Vivian looked at the valley, their valley, and Elias saw something harden in her expression. Not fear, determination. Then we deal with this like we dealt with the wolves, she said. We fight back. Vivian, I mean it. This is our land, our herd, our future. We don't let anyone take it. Looking at her fierce expression, blood-stained and exhausted and absolutely refusing to quit, Elias felt something shift in his chest. Not quite love. Not yet. But the seed of it. The possibility. No, he agreed. We don't. Elias left at sunset with 2 rifles, a revolver, and a sick feeling in his gut about leaving Vivian alone. She stood in the cabin doorway watching him saddle his horse, shotgun already in her hands. I'll be back before dawn, he said. I know. Keep the fire low. Don't open the door for anyone but me. Elias, I'm not a child. I know that too. He swung up into the saddle, his leg protesting. But I've never left you alone overnight before, and there's armed thieves working the valley, and You need to go. Vivian's voice was steady. Robert's waiting. I'll be fine. If anything happens, then I'll handle it. Same as I've handled everything else. She met his eyes. Go. Do what needs doing. I'll see you in the morning. Elias wanted to say something else. Something about being careful. About how he'd started to need her in ways that had nothing to do with partnership. But the words stuck in his throat, so he just nodded and rode out. The valley looked different in twilight. Shadows pooled in every hollow. The tree line seemed closer, more threatening. Every sound made his hand move toward his rifle. He met Robert at the North Fork as planned. They rode together in silence, following a route that took them past 3 other homesteads. All quiet. All dark except for the glow of fires through windows. How's Morrison? Elias asked. Fever set in this afternoon. Doc's not optimistic. Robert scanned the tree line. His wife's talking about moving back east, says Montana's too dangerous. She might be right. Maybe. But running doesn't solve anything. These bastards will just hit someone else. They rode for 2 hours, seeing nothing but darkness and snow. Around 10, they stopped to rest the horses near an abandoned line shack. Tell me about your wife, Robert said, building a small fire. Martha says she's got steel in her. She does. You're lucky. Most mail-order brides wouldn't last a week out here. Elias thought about Vivian shooting wolves in the dark, climbing onto roofs in blizzards, standing on that bridge in Boston, choosing spite over surrender. She's not most women, he said. Martha likes her, says she's practical. That's one word for it. Robert poured coffee from a tin pot. You two getting along all right? I know it's only been, 6 weeks? 5 weeks and 3 days. The precision of it surprised Elias. And yeah, we're making it work. That's good. Martha and I, we married young. Knew each other our whole lives. Even then, first year was rough. Learning to live with someone, share everything, compromise. Robert stared into the fire. Can't imagine doing it with a stranger. She's less of a stranger now. That mean you're happy? Elias considered the question. Happy seemed like too big a word for what he felt, but not unhappy either. Something between complicated and messy and real. I'm less alone, he said finally. That's enough. They finished their patrol around 3 a.m. without incident. Robert headed back to his place. Elias turned his horse toward home, exhaustion pulling at him. The cabin came into view just before dawn, smoke rising from the chimney. Everything looked normal. But as Elias dismounted, something felt wrong. The door was barred from inside. That was smart. But there were footprints in the snow near the window. Fresh. Not his. Not Vivian's. Someone had been here. Elias pulled his revolver and moved to the door, knocked quietly. Vivian, it's me. No answer. Vivian! The bar scraped. The door cracked open. Vivian stood there, shotgun raised, her face pale. Someone was here, she said. I saw the tracks. What happened? She let him inside, rebarred the door. Around midnight, I heard a horse outside, then footsteps. Someone tried the door. Did they say anything? No, just tried the handle. When it didn't open, they walked around the cabin, checked the windows. I could hear them talking, but couldn't make out words. How many? 2, I think. Maybe 3. Vivian set down the shotgun with shaking hands. They stayed for maybe 10 minutes, then rode off. Elias felt cold rage settle in his chest. They were scouting, seeing if anyone was home, checking defenses. That's what I figured. Vivian moved to the stove, started making coffee with mechanical precision. So I sat in that chair with the shotgun and waited to see if they'd try to force entry. What would you have done if they had? Shot them. No hesitation. This is our home. They had no right. Elias looked at her. This woman who'd been terrified of firing a gun 6 weeks ago, now calmly talking about killing intruders. You're something else, he said quietly. I'm tired of being afraid. She poured coffee, hands steadier now. Tired of being vulnerable, of waiting for the next bad thing. She turned to face him. So yes, I would have shot them, and I wouldn't have lost sleep over it. Good. Elias took the coffee. Because they'll be back. I know. And next time, they might not just scout. I know that too. They stood in the cabin's dim light, two people who'd learned that survival meant becoming harder than you wanted to be. We need to talk to the others, Elias said. Set up a real defense plan. These thieves are organized. We need to be more organized. The next day, 8 ranchers met at the Talbot place. Elias and Vivian, Robert and Martha. 4 other families who worked the valley. Everyone looked exhausted. Everyone was armed. Morrison died this morning, Robert announced. Infection spread too fast. Silence. Someone cursed quietly. His wife's leaving, Robert continued. Taking the kids back to her family in Ohio, which means these bastards just murdered a man and drove a whole family out. We need law, one rancher said. Real law. Not just us riding around in the dark. Nearest sheriff is 3 days away, another argued. By the time he gets here, we'll all be cleaned out or dead. So what do we do? Everyone looked at Robert. He glanced at Elias. We set a trap, Elias said. What kind of trap? We use Morrison's place. It's abandoned now, empty. Perfect target. Elias leaned forward. We spread word that his widow left cattle behind, couldn't transport them. That'll draw the thieves. Then what? Then we're waiting for them. Elias looked around the room. 8 of us, positioned around the property. When they show up to steal cattle that aren't even there, we take them. You mean kill them? Martha's voice was flat. I mean stop them, however necessary. That's vigilante justice. That's survival. Vivian spoke up. Everyone turned to her. These men murdered Morrison. They're terrorizing the valley, and there's no law coming to help us. So we either fight back or we lose everything we've built. She's right, Robert said. I hate it, but she's right. We're on our own out here. The debate went on for an hour. Some wanted to wait for proper law. Others wanted to abandon their homesteads and move to established towns. But in the end, desperation won. They'd set the trap in 3 days, give time to prepare, to position themselves, to steel their nerves for what might come. Riding back to their ranch, Vivian was quiet. You all right? Elias asked. I just committed to an ambush that might end with people dying. You committed to defending what's yours. Is there a difference? Out here, no. Vivian stared at the landscape. I keep thinking about that woman on the bridge in Boston, the one who was too afraid to even live. She'd never recognize what I've become. Is that good or bad? I don't know yet. The next 3 days were tense. Elias and Vivian prepared like they were going to war, cleaned weapons, counted ammunition, practiced shooting until Vivian could hit a target at 50 yards. You're getting good at this, Elias said, watching her reload smoothly. I'm getting good at a lot of things I never wanted to learn. She sighted down the barrel. Killing wolves, butchering cattle, now maybe killing people. You don't have to come tomorrow night. Yes, I do. She fired, dead center. Because if something happens to you out there and I stayed home safe, I'd never forgive myself. Elias felt something warm and painful in his chest. Vivian, don't. She lowered the rifle. Don't make this harder by getting sentimental. We have a job to do. Let's focus on that. The night of the trap, they rode to Morrison's place in the dark. The other ranchers were already positioned, 2 in the barn, 2 in the tree line, 2 watching the road. Elias and Vivian took the house itself, hiding in the dark parlor with a clear view of the yard. They waited. Hours passed. Vivian sat absolutely still, rifle across her lap. Elias watched her in the darkness, marveling at her composure. No fidgeting, no nervousness, just cold focus. Around midnight, Robert's signal came, an owl hoot that meant riders approaching. Elias moved to the window. 3 men on horseback, moving slowly, checking their surroundings. Professional, careful. They stopped in the yard, one dismounted, walked toward the barn. Where's the cattle? His voice carried in the still air. Widow must have moved them, another answered. Or this is a setup. The third man, older, with a scarred face visible in the moonlight, laughed. Who's going to set us up? These ranchers are too scared to organize. Wrong, Elias thought. The signal came. Robert firing a warning shot. Drop your weapons. You're surrounded. The thieves reacted instantly. The one near the barn drew and fired toward Robert's position. The others scattered, using their horses as cover. Chaos erupted. Gunfire from multiple directions, muzzle flashes in the darkness, horses screaming, men shouting. Elias fired through the window, aiming for the scarred man. Missed. The man returned fire, bullets splintering the window frame. Beside him, Vivian fired twice. One thief went down, clutching his leg. Good shot. Elias reloaded. I was aiming for his chest, Vivian said flatly. More gunfire. One of the thieves made a break for the trees. Two ranchers cut him off, firing until he fell. The scarred man was still fighting, pinned behind his dead horse, shooting at anything that moved. This is murder, he shouted. We're just trying to make a living. You murdered Morrison, Robert's voice. That's more than trying to make a living. The scarred man fired again. Someone cried out. Hit. Elias moved to the door. Cover me. Elias, no! But he was already outside, circling around, using the darkness. His legs screamed with each step, but he ignored it. Got behind the scarred man's position. Aimed. Drop it! The man spun, fired wild. Elias shot him in the shoulder. He went down, gun falling. The remaining thief, seeing his leader fall, threw up his hands. Don't shoot! I'm done! Silence fell except for moaning wounded and the sound of someone reloading. Robert emerged from the barn, limping. Everyone all right? Jensen took one in the arm, someone called. But he'll live. They gathered in the yard. Two thieves dead, one wounded, one surrendering. The scarred man clutched his shoulder, glaring. You're all crazy, he spat. Montana law will hear about this. Good, Martha said, stepping into the light. Let them hear about how you murdered one of ours. See how sympathetic they are. They tied up the survivors, loaded the dead onto a wagon. Come morning, they'd ride them into Laurel Creek, turn them over to whatever authority existed. Elias found Vivian standing apart, staring at the man she'd shot. He was alive, just wounded, but the reality of it showed on her face. You did what you had to, he said quietly. I shot a person, Elias, a living person. A person who would have robbed us and maybe killed us. I know, She took a shaky breath. I just thought it would feel different, more dramatic. Instead, it just feels empty. Elias understood. He'd felt the same thing the first time he'd had to shoot a man, a drifter who'd attacked him on the road years ago. The shocking banality of violence, how it was nothing like stories made it seem. It doesn't get easier, he said, that empty feeling. But it means you're still human. Is that supposed to be comforting? It's supposed to be true. They rode home at dawn, exhausted and shaken. The valley felt different now. They'd crossed a line, taken justice into their own hands, killed people, become exactly the kind of hard that the frontier demanded. At the cabin, Vivian went straight to the water barrel and scrubbed her hands like she was trying to wash off more than powder burns. I need to tell you something, she said without turning around. All right. When I was standing there with that rifle, waiting to shoot, I wasn't thinking about right or wrong. I wasn't thinking about justice or self-defense. She turned to face him. I was thinking about protecting what's mine. This cabin. This land. You. The last word hit Elias like a physical thing. You were thinking about protecting me? He asked quietly. Yes. And I realized that somewhere in the last 6 weeks, you stopped being a business arrangement and started being someone I actually care whether they live or die. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. Isn't that ridiculous? I came here for partnership and somehow I ended up with... She trailed off, unable or unwilling to name it. Elias crossed the room, stood close enough to see the exhaustion in her eyes, the gunpowder on her cheek, the fierce determination that never quite faded. It's not ridiculous, he said, because somewhere in the last 6 weeks, you stopped being someone I tolerated and started being someone I'd kill to protect. Vivian looked up at him. That's not romantic. No, but it's true. They stood there, two people who'd met as strangers and survived into something more complicated. Not love exactly, not yet, but the foundation of it, the possibility. I'm terrified, Vivian said quietly. Of what? Of caring, of building something that can be taken away, of opening myself up to hurt again. Me too. So what do we do? Elias thought about it, about Sarah who'd left him when he was damaged, about Vivian standing on that bridge, about two broken people who'd somehow found each other in the middle of nowhere. "We take the risk," he said finally, "because the alternative is going through life protected but alone. And I've tried that. It's not living, it's just existing." Vivian searched his face. "When did you become wise?" "About 5 seconds ago. Don't expect it to last." She smiled, a real smile this time, tired but genuine. "All right, we take the risk. Together?" "Together." The word hung between them, meaning more than it had 6 weeks ago when they'd stood before Reverend Clayton. Then it had been a contract. Now it was a choice. Elias reached out, took her hand. Her fingers were calloused now, rough from work. So different from the soft-handed seamstress who'd stepped off that train. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted. "The caring part. It's been so long since I let myself feel anything that I've forgotten how." "Then we learn together." Vivian squeezed his hand. "Same way we learned everything else. By doing it badly at first and getting better." "That's very practical." "I'm a practical woman." They stood like that for a long moment, hand in hand, neither quite sure what came next, but both committed to figuring it out. Outside, dawn painted the valley gold. The cattle were safe. The cabin stood solid. Spring was still months away, but for the first time, Elias could imagine it arriving. Could imagine this place becoming more than just somewhere to survive. Could imagine a future. The next week brought change to the valley. Word spread about the ambush. The two surviving thieves were hauled to the territorial capital to face trial. Morrison's widow came back long enough to sell her property. Robert bought it, planning to expand his operation. Life found a new rhythm. Elias and Vivian fell into patterns that felt almost domestic. She'd wake first, start coffee. He'd handle morning barn chores while she made breakfast. They'd work separately through the day, him with the livestock, her with mending, and the endless small tasks that kept a homestead functional. Evenings they'd spend together, talking or sitting in comfortable silence. Small things shifted. Vivian stopped sleeping in the loft, instead making a bed near the fire where it was warmer. Some nights, Elias would wake to find her sitting up, staring into the darkness. "Can't sleep?" he asked one night. "Dreams." She wrapped the blanket tighter. "About the ambush. About shooting that man." "They'll fade." "Will they?" Elias thought about the logging accident. The sound of wood splintering, his own screams. Years later, and he still heard it sometimes. "No," he admitted, "but they'll hurt less." Vivian absorbed that. Is this what life is now? Just collecting scars and learning to live with them? Out here? Yeah, probably. That's bleak. That's Montana. She laughed despite herself. You say that about everything. Because it's always true. Vivian was quiet for a moment. Then, Elias, do you ever regret placing that advertisement, taking this risk? Every single day. Really? Yeah, but I also can't imagine going back to how things were before. He met her eyes across the darkness. So it's complicated. Most real things are. February arrived with more snow and brutal cold. The cattle made it through, barely. They lost one to what looked like disease, had to burn the carcass to prevent spread. 19 head now. The smallest the herd had been since Elias bought the place. We need to rebuild in spring, Vivian said, studying their ledger. She'd started keeping detailed records, births, deaths, expenses, income. Treating the ranch like a business. Rebuilding takes capital. Then we find capital. We sell something, take loans, work harder. Vivian, we're already working as hard as humanly possible. Then we work smarter. She tapped the ledger. I've been thinking, we're trying to do everything ourselves. But what if we partnered with other ranchers, pooled resources for spring cattle purchase, shared breeding stock, coordinated sales so we have negotiating power with buyers? Elias stared at her. That's actually smart. I know, I occasionally have good ideas. She made a note. I'll talk to Martha, see if the other families are interested. When did you become a businesswoman? I've always been a businesswoman, just never had a business before. She looked up at him. My father taught me that struggling alone is stupidity disguised as independence. If we want to build something real, we need to think bigger than just our little 160 acres. Over the next month, Vivian organized what she called the Blackstone Valley Cooperative. 6 ranching families pooling resources, sharing equipment, coordinating purchases and sales. It started small, sharing an expensive breeding bull, combining orders to get better prices from suppliers. But it worked. By early March, they'd saved enough collectively to place a group order for spring cattle that would have been impossible individually. "You're good at this," Martha told Vivian during one of their planning meetings. "Organizing, planning, making people work together. It's just logic. We're all trying to do the same thing. Why compete when we can cooperate? Most people can't see past their own fence line. Then most people are short-sighted." Watching Vivian negotiate, plan, and organize, Elias realized she'd found her purpose. This wasn't just survival for her anymore. It was building, creating something larger than herself. She was thriving. One evening in late March, with snow finally starting to melt, they sat on the cabin's front step, watching the sunset. The valley was transforming, bare ground appearing in patches, the creek running free again, the first birds returning. "Spring's coming," Vivian said. "Yeah, we made it through winter." "We did." She leaned against his shoulder, a casual touch that would have been unthinkable 2 months ago. Now it felt natural. "Elias?" "Yeah?" "I'm glad I answered your advertisement." He felt warmth spread through his chest. "Me too." Even with the wolves and thieves and almost dying multiple times? Even with all that, they sat in silence, watching the sky turn pink and gold. Somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed. Closer, a bird sang, the first Elias had heard since November. "You know what I realized?" Vivian said quietly. "What?" "I'm happy. Actually happy. Not just surviving or getting by. Happy." She turned to look at him. "When did that happen?" Elias thought about it, about the woman who'd stepped off the train 5 months ago, sharp-eyed and desperate and terrified beneath the practicality. About the woman beside him now, confident, capable, integrated into this life like she'd always belonged. "I think it happened piece by piece," he said. "So gradually, we didn't notice until it was already done." "Is that how happiness works?" "I don't know. I'm not an expert." "Are you happy?" The question caught him off guard. Was he? Elias examined his feelings like they were something foreign. The cabin didn't feel empty anymore. The valley didn't feel like a prison. The future didn't feel like just endless repetition of barely surviving. "Yeah," he said, surprising himself. "I think I am." Vivian smiled. "Good, because I need you to stay that way." "Why?" "Because—" She hesitated. "Because I'm starting to believe we can actually build something lasting here, and I can't do that alone." "You're not alone." "I know, that's what makes it possible." The sun sank behind the mountains, painting everything gold and purple. The air was still cold but held the promise of warmth coming, of new growth, of possibilities that had seemed impossible 5 months ago. Elias put his arm around Vivian's shoulders. She leaned into him, two damaged people who'd gambled on each other and somehow won. "Next winter will be easier," he said. "Will it?" "We'll have more cattle, better supplies, experience, the cooperative." He paused. "Each other." "That's almost optimistic." "Don't get used to it." Vivian laughed. Then, before Elias could overthink it, she turned and kissed him. It wasn't their first kiss. They'd kissed briefly at their wedding, a perfunctory seal on a contract. But this was different. This was choice, intent, connection. When they pulled apart, both were breathing hard. "Was that all right?" Vivian asked. "Yeah." Elias's voice was rough. "More than all right." "Good. Because I've been wanting to do that for weeks, but couldn't figure out how to bring it up practically." "Some things don't need to be practical." "I'm learning that." They sat together as the darkness fell, the valley settling into night around them. Inside the cabin, the fire needed building up. The animals needed checking. 100 small tasks awaited. But for now, they just sat, together, happy. And that was enough. Spring came to Montana like a promise the land had been keeping secret all winter. The transformation happened fast once it started. Ice broke on the creek with sounds like gunshots. Snow melted into rivers that carved new paths through the valley. Grass pushed through mud, tentative at first, then aggressive, turning brown hillsides green almost overnight. Elias stood in the doorway one April morning, watching Vivian walk toward the barn with a bucket in each hand, her hair loose in the warming air. 6 months ago, she'd been a stranger stepping off a train. Now she moved through this landscape like she'd grown from it. "You're staring again," she called without turning around. "Can't help it." "Yes, you can. You're just choosing not to." Elias smiled. Their relationship had shifted after that kiss on the step. Not dramatically. They still slept separately, still maintained careful boundaries. But the wall between them had developed cracks. Small intimacies crept in, her hand on his shoulder when she passed, him brushing snow from her hair. Conversations that stretched late into the night about things that mattered. They were learning each other, slowly, carefully. The cooperative's cattle purchase arrived in mid-April, 40 head split among 6 families. Elias and Vivian's share was 7 young heifers and 1 bull. Added to their surviving 19, it brought them to 27 animals. "Still not enough to be truly profitable," Vivian said, studying the new cattle. "But it's progress. It's the most I've had since I bought this place. Then we're trending upward." She made notes in her ledger. "By fall, if we're smart, we might actually turn a profit for the first time." Elias watched her calculate, plan, organize. "You really love this, don't you?" "The math? All of it, the planning, the building, turning chaos into structure." Vivian looked up. "My father used to say business was just organized problem solving. I'm good at problems. Always have been." She paused. "What I'm not good at is sitting still while life happens to me. I need to be doing, building, moving forward." "We're definitely moving forward. Are we, though?" She set down her pencil. "Or are we just treading water in a slightly bigger pond?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, we're doing better than we were, but we're still one bad season away from losing everything. One illness, one accident. We're not secure, Elias. We're just less desperate. That's still better than we were. Better isn't enough. I want stable, sustainable, a foundation we can actually build on instead of constantly repairing." Elias understood the drive behind her words. She'd lost everything once. She was terrified of it happening again. "So what do you want to do?" he asked. Vivian was quiet for a moment, thinking. "I want to expand, not just cattle, crops, chickens for eggs we can sell, maybe pigs. Diversify so we're not dependent on any single thing." "That takes capital." "Everything takes capital, but the cooperative gives us leverage. We pool resources, share equipment, coordinate planting schedules." She looked at him. "What if we stopped thinking of ourselves as one small ranch and started thinking as part of a larger economic unit?" "You want to turn the valley into a business." "I want to turn the valley into a community that supports itself. There's a difference." Over the next month, Vivian put her vision into action. She organized planting schedules with the other ranchers, arranged for bulk seed purchases, convinced 3 families to invest in shared equipment, a better plow, additional tools. She traveled to Laurel Creek twice a week, negotiating with suppliers, establishing credit, building relationships. Martha Talbot watched all this with amused respect. "Your wife's going to own this whole valley eventually," she told Elias one day. "Probably." "That bother you?" "Should it? Some men would be threatened by a woman with that much ambition." Elias thought about it. "I married her because she was practical and tough. Can't complain when she proves me right." Martha smiled. "You're smarter than you look, Elias Mercer." But success brought complications. In early May, a land speculator arrived in the valley. A man named Garrett, who wore expensive suits and talked about progress and opportunity. He started making offers on properties. Good offers. More than most ranches were worth. "He approached me yesterday," Robert said at a cooperative meeting. "Offered $3,000 for my spread." Shocked silence. 3,000 was a fortune. "What did you tell him?" someone asked. "Told him I'd think about it." Robert looked uncomfortable. "That's a lot of money. Enough to move somewhere easier. Start over without wolves and blizzards and constant struggle." Vivian leaned forward. "Did he say what he wants the land for?" "Mining company. Says there's copper in these hills. Wants to buy up the valley and strip mine it." More silence. Everyone knew what mining meant. Destroyed land, polluted water. The end of ranching in Blackstone Valley. "We can't sell," Vivian said flatly. "Easy for you to say," another rancher argued. "You've been here 6 months. Some of us have been breaking our backs on this land for years. $3,000 is life-changing money. It's blood money. You sell to Garrett, he destroys everything we've built. We haven't built much. Yet. We haven't built much yet. Vivian stood. But we're building. The cooperative is working. We're finally gaining ground. You sell now, and you're throwing away future profit for immediate cash. Future profit doesn't feed my kids today. The meeting dissolved into argument. Elias watched Vivian fight for her vision, for their vision, and saw her frustration as people wavered. Riding home, she was quiet. You can't control what they decide, Elias said gently. I know. She sighed. I finally found something worth building, and I can't stand watching people throw it away out of fear. It's not just fear. 3,000 is real money. I know that too. Vivian stared at the landscape. But money runs out. Land lasts. What we're building here lasts. Don't they see that? Some people don't think long-term. They think survival. We're past just surviving. We're at the point where we could actually thrive if people would just hold on a little longer. Elias understood her frustration, but he also understood desperation. He'd lived it for 3 years before she arrived. Over the next week, Garrett made more offers. 2 families sold, packed up and left within days. The cooperative suddenly felt fragile. Vivian threw herself into work, angry and determined. She expanded their chicken operation, built a better coop, started a vegetable garden 3 times the size they needed. She worked from dawn until well past dark, pushing herself harder than was healthy. You need to slow down, Elias told her one evening. I'm fine. You're exhausted. I'm busy. Vivian. He caught her arm as she passed. Talk to me. She stopped. For a moment she just stood there, shoulders tight with tension. Then something broke. I'm terrified, she admitted. Terrified that everything I've built here will collapse, that people will keep selling, that Garrett will destroy the valley, that I'll lose this place like I lost everything in Boston. We're not selling. I know. But if everyone else does, we'll be surrounded by mining operations. The water will be poisoned, the land ruined. We'll have to leave anyway. Elias pulled her close. She resisted for a moment, then collapsed against him, shaking. I can't lose this, she whispered. I can't. This is the first place I've ever felt like I belonged, like I was building something real. If Garrett takes it away, he won't. Elias held her tighter. We won't let him. How do we stop him? I don't know yet, but we figure it out. Together. They stood like that for a long time, holding each other against the uncertainty. The solution came from an unexpected source. Martha Talbot showed up 3 days later with papers and a determined expression. I've been doing research, she announced, about land rights and mining law. Turns out Garrett can't force us to sell, and if enough of us refuse, his mining operation becomes impossible. Define enough, Vivian said. He needs contiguous land, at least 80% of the valley. Right now, with the 2 families who sold, he's got maybe 30%. Martha spread papers on the table. We get the remaining families to commit to not selling, he's blocked. People are scared, Elias said. That 3,000 is tempting. Then we make refusing more tempting than selling. Martha looked at Vivian. Your cooperative is working. Production is up. Costs are down. We show them the numbers. Prove that staying and building is more profitable long-term than taking Garrett's money and running. Over the next week, Vivian and Martha visited every remaining rancher. They brought ledgers, projections, hard data showing how the cooperative was transforming the valley's economics. Some were convinced immediately. Others took more persuasion, but slowly, commitments came in. When they finally had pledges from every remaining family, Vivian felt something she hadn't felt in months, hope that didn't come with a side of terror. Garrett showed up at their cabin 2 days later, angry and threatening. You're making a mistake, he told Elias. This valley is worth nothing for ranching, but it's sitting on a fortune in copper. Then that fortune stays in the ground, Elias said. I'll raise my offer, 4,000 per property. Not interested. 5,000. Still no. Garrett's expression turned ugly. You people are fools, clinging to this worthless dirt while real money is right there. It's not worthless to us, Vivian said from the doorway. She'd been listening. This isn't just dirt. It's our homes, our future. You can't buy that. Everything has a price. Not this. She moved to stand beside Elias. We're not selling. None of us. So you can either accept that or waste more time making offers we'll keep refusing. Garrett stared at them, realizing he'd lost. You'll regret this. Maybe, Vivian said, but at least we'll regret it on our own land. He left, furious. The valley was safe. That night, the remaining families gathered at the Talbot place to celebrate. Someone brought whiskey. Someone else brought food. It wasn't much. Rough frontier celebration in a rough frontier place. But it was theirs. Elias found Vivian standing outside, looking at the stars. You did it, he said quietly. Saved the valley. We did it, all of us. It was your vision, your fight. Vivian turned to face him. Can I tell you something? Anything. 6 months ago, I was standing on a bridge ready to give up on everything. I thought my life was over, that I'd failed at everything that mattered. She paused. Now I'm standing in Montana having just fought off a mining company and built something real, and I can't quite believe it's the same person. It's not the same person. You've changed. Have I? Or did I just finally find a place where I could be who I actually am? Elias considered that. Maybe both. Maybe. Vivian looked back at the stars. I'm not afraid anymore, Elias. Of failing. Of losing. Of being hurt. I mean, I'm still practical and I still plan for worst-case scenarios, but the terror that used to drive everything, it's gone. When did that happen? I don't know. Somewhere between shooting wolves and fighting thieves and arguing with mining speculators. She laughed. Apparently I had to come to the literal wilderness to find my courage. It was always there, you just needed a reason to use it. She turned to him. You helped. You know that, right? The way you trusted me, treated me as equal, never tried to protect me from the hard parts. I couldn't have done any of this without you. I know, that's what makes it work. Vivian moved closer. We've been dancing around something for months now, being careful, maintaining boundaries. Yeah, I'm tired of careful. She looked up at him. I'm tired of boundaries. I'm tired of treating this like a business arrangement when it stopped being that months ago. Elias's heart hammered. What are you saying? I'm saying I love you. The words came out fierce, almost defiant, not because you're convenient or because we're stuck together. I love you because you're brave and stubborn and you've built a life out of nothing, because you trusted me when you had every reason not to. Because when I look at you, I see someone who understands what it means to keep fighting even when everything's falling apart. Elias stared at her, this woman who'd transformed his life without him even noticing until it was done. You too, he said. I think I have for months, but I was too scared to admit it. Scared of what? Of caring. Of needing someone. Of building something that could be taken away. He pulled her close. But you were right earlier. Being protected but alone isn't living. It's just existing. Vivian kissed him. Different from that first careful kiss months ago. This was certainty. Commitment. Choice. When they pulled apart, both were breathing hard. So what now? Vivian asked. Now we go back to the cabin and stop sleeping in separate areas like idiots. She laughed. That's very romantic. I'm not good at romantic. I'm good at practical. Lucky for you, so am I. They walked back to the cabin hand in hand past celebrating neighbors, under stars that seemed brighter than they'd been all winter. The valley was safe. The ranch was growing. The future was uncertain, but possible. And they were together. Actually together. Not just surviving side by side, but choosing each other deliberately. Summer came in hot and bright. The cattle fattened on good grass. Crops grew. The cooperative thrived. By August, they'd expanded to 9 families and were coordinating sales that brought in real profit. Vivian's garden produced more vegetables than they could eat. She started preserving, canning, pickling, drying, building stores for next winter. We're actually getting ahead, she said one evening, surveying jars of preserved food. For the first time, we're not just barely making it, we're succeeding. Feels strange, Elias admitted. Good strange or bad strange? Just strange. I've been in survival mode so long, I don't know how to process actually thriving. Vivian moved to stand beside him. We learn, same way we learned everything else. In September, she told him she was pregnant. Elias froze, the words not quite processing. You're Pregnant, about 3 months, I think. Vivian's expression was complicated, fear and hope mixed together. I wasn't sure whether to tell you or wait, but we agreed on honesty, so he kissed her. Hard. When he pulled back, both of them were crying. I'm terrified, Vivian said. Me too. I don't know how to be a mother. I barely know how to be a wife. You're doing fine at both. What if something goes wrong? Women die in childbirth out here. Babies die. What if... Then we deal with it. Elias held her face in his hands. Together. But Vivian, we've survived wolves and thieves and the worst winter in years. We'll survive this too. That's not the same thing. No, but it's what we've got. Over the next months, they prepared. Built a proper cradle, gathered supplies. Martha Talbot, who delivered 6 babies in the valley, agreed to help when the time came. Winter arrived again, but this one felt different. They had food stored, cattle healthy and protected, a community around them. The cabin had been expanded, still rough but bigger, warmer. Vivian worked through her pregnancy with typical stubbornness, ignoring Elias's attempts to make her rest. I'm pregnant, not broken, she said when he tried to stop her from mucking stalls. You're 7 months pregnant and lifting things you shouldn't. I'll stop when I can't do it anymore. Vivian, Elias, I've spent my whole life fighting to prove I was capable. I'm not stopping now just because I'm growing a person. He gave up arguing. She'd do what she wanted anyway. The baby came in February, during a snowstorm that felt like déjà vu. Martha made it through the storm. The birth was long and brutal. Elias paced outside, listening to Vivian scream, feeling helpless and terrified. After 8 hours, a baby's cry cut through the storm. Martha opened the door, smiling. You have a daughter. Elias stumbled inside. Vivian lay exhausted in their bed, holding a tiny red-faced creature wrapped in blankets. She's perfect, Vivian whispered. Look at her. She's perfect. The baby wasn't perfect. She was wrinkled and angry and squalling. But looking at her, Elias felt something crack open in his chest. Some final wall he'd been maintaining fell away completely. What should we name her? He asked. Vivian looked up at him, exhausted and happy and alive. Hope. Her name is Hope. That's sentimental. I know. But after everything, after coming here ready to die and building this instead, she looked down at their daughter. Hope feels right. Elias sat beside them, this family he'd somehow built from nothing. Yeah, it does. The years that followed weren't easy. Nothing in Montana was ever easy. But they were good. The ranch grew. The cooperative expanded. More families moved into the valley, drawn by the success they'd built. Vivian became the unofficial leader, organizing and planning and driving everyone toward better futures. Hope grew into a wild, tough little girl who climbed everything and feared nothing. At 3, she could ride. At 5, she could shoot. She had Elias's stubbornness and Vivian's sharp mind. 2 more children followed, a boy named Thomas and another girl named Sarah. The cabin expanded again into a proper house. The herd reached 60 head. They were successful by any measure, but success didn't erase the scars. Elias's leg never healed right. Some mornings he could barely walk. He learned to live with it, the way he'd learned to live with everything else. Vivian still had nightmares about the ambush, about shooting that thief. Some nights Elias would wake to find her sitting up, staring into darkness. It never really leaves, does it? She said one night. The things we did to survive. No, but it gets quieter. Is that enough? It has to be. They sat together in the darkness. 2 people who'd done terrible things and built beautiful things, and learned that life was almost always both at once. 10 years after Vivian stepped off that train, Elias stood on the ridge above their valley, watching the sun set. The house below was large now, solid. Smoke rose from the chimney, children played in the yard, cattle grazed across expanded pastures. It looked nothing like the desperate, dying ranch he'd been running alone. Vivian climbed up to join him, moving slower now, tired from a day spent organizing the cooperative's annual meeting. What are you thinking about? She asked. That advertisement I placed. How desperate I was. How certain I was that it would end badly. And? And I was wrong. About everything. He turned to her. I thought I was looking for someone to help me survive. Instead, I found someone who taught me how to actually live. Vivian leaned against him. We taught each other. Maybe. They stood together as darkness fell, watching their valley transform into something peaceful and permanent. The children's laughter carried on the wind. Somewhere, cattle lowed. Life, ordinary and extraordinary, all at once. Do you ever miss Boston? Elias asked. Sometimes, the libraries, the culture, the not freezing to death every winter. Vivian smiled. But not the person I was there. That woman standing on that bridge? She was already dead, just hadn't admitted it yet. And now? Now I'm alive. Actually alive. Not just existing or surviving, but building something that matters. She looked up at him. You gave me that. You gave it to yourself. I just got lucky enough to be here when you did. Vivian turned to face him fully. You know what I learned out here? That strength isn't about never breaking. It's about breaking and choosing to rebuild anyway. We both came here broken, Elias, but we rebuilt together. That sounds like wisdom. Or maybe just perspective earned through a lot of suffering. Is there a difference? Probably not. They walked back to the house together, this couple who'd started as strangers gambling on desperate hope and built something real. The path was worn now, familiar. They knew every rock, every dip, every turn. Inside, the children were already in bed. The fire burned warm. Home. Elias thought about the lonely man he'd been, placing that advertisement with shaking hands. Thought about the terrified woman on a Boston bridge. Thought about how two broken people had found each other in the middle of nowhere and somehow made each other whole. Not perfectly whole. They both still carried scars. Still had nightmares. Still struggled with pain and fear and doubt. But whole enough. Whole enough to build a life, raise a family, transform a dying ranch into something sustainable and good. Whole enough to love. That night, lying in bed with Vivian asleep beside him, Elias listened to the valley settle into darkness. Somewhere, wolves still howled. Somewhere, winter waited to test them again. The frontier was still brutal and unforgiving, but they'd survived it before. They'd survive it again, together. And in the morning, they'd wake up and work and build and fight for what they'd created. Because that's what survival meant out here. Not just lasting through the bad times, but actively building something worth lasting for. The woman from the East and the broken cowboy. Two people who'd lost everything and found each other. Who'd learned that love wasn't about perfect circumstances or easy lives. It was about choosing someone and standing with them when everything went wrong. It was about rebuilding, together, always together. Spring would come again, and the summer after, and the winter after that. The cycle would continue. They'd keep building, keep fighting, keep choosing each other, because they'd learned something the frontier taught everyone who survived it. Life wasn't about avoiding the storms. It was about learning to stand in them without being broken beyond repair. And when you found someone to stand with you, someone who saw your scars and chose you anyway, you held on. You built. You survived. Together. That was the lesson of Montana, the lesson of Blackstone Valley, the lesson two strangers had taught each other in a cabin that barely kept out the cold. You could lose everything and still rebuild. You could be broken and still be strong. You could start with nothing but desperate hope and build a life worth living. All it took was courage, stubbornness, and someone willing to stand beside you when the wolves came howling. Elias closed his eyes and slept. Dreamless, peaceful, home.